Okay, let's take a look at Flexbox. So Flexbox is a layout tool that we can use. We've already looked at laying out some of our elements using kind of float and block positioning and inline positioning, stuff like that. But this is kind of a very widely used way of putting things where we want them on our page and kind of having our page react responsively to window sizes, etc. So first thing that I highly recommend you do, I've put a link in this lesson to a CSS tricks website. And I highly recommend that you go ahead and just give this a read. I have copied and pasted this into the lesson as well, but we will be referring back to this website quite a lot as well. And it gives you just a bit of a brief overview of kind of what Flexbox is and why it is handy, and all of the kind of main components of a Flexbox. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on this just yet. This is what we're going to be looking at mostly today, all of the Flex properties, and let's just get right into it and start making some Flex layouts. Great, so I have the starter code open here in front of me, and you should do the same. So let's just have a quick look at what's in our starter code. Well, we have an assets folder, which has a bunch of images in it. We have a styles folder, one with do not modify, and basically this just has a little bit of CSS that we don't need to practice in this lesson, but what it will mean is we end up with an output that looks quite nice at the end of it. I highly recommend, though, that you do go and have a read through this document just so you understand what it's actually doing. Nothing is then a surprise for you later on. We have our main CSS, and this is where we are going to be writing our code today. We have an index.html, which just has a bunch of kind of tags. We've got some divs here as well, and we'll have a look at those when we open Live Server. A little README that just lets you know that we're not actually affiliated with Airbnb or anything like that. We just are using their kind of website as an example of how to lay out Flexboxes. We just think they have a really nice example of how to do it. So we're going to look at them as an example. And finally, we have a reference image of what we are actually going to try and recreate in this lesson. So it's quite a simple kind of layout of, four kind of cards of properties that you might want to stay at in the UK. And we've got kind of a little navigation bar up here at the top, as well with like a login button, logo on the side here, etc. Okay, so first things first, let's have a look at what we actually get when we just open our index.html. Let me bring over the live server output here, and I'm just going to move these around so that I can flick between them. Okay, so we've got everything kind of in here already. We have some cards for our different properties with the images in them, and we also have the content up here and the content of our cards. So yeah, they kind of look correct, but they're not in the right layout. That's what we're tasked with completing today. So first things first, if you went and had a look at that CSS tricks website, you'll see that the first property that's available to us is this display flex. Let's just have a quick look at that here. So we've got our container, and in order to have a flex box, we need to have display flex in it. Okay, so just follow along with me and we'll kind of see what happens, and then we'll talk about the output in a moment. So let's have a look at our HTML. We're going to look kind of mainly at the moment at this top sort of header bar and this nav bar in the center, and get that looking right, because at the moment everything's just kind of bunched up together and it doesn't really look correct. Nothing's kind of aligned into the center like it should be. So first things first, let's have a look at our HTML. And let's have a look at this kind of bit here. Okay, so this is the logo here, this assets airbnb.svg, and we've got some A tags. Okay, they don't actually link anywhere, and we've also got that login button, which is just an image as well. So the first thing that we can see from this is that we need everything to be, let's go back to the reference image. Let me just open these. Go to the reference image. We can see that everything wants to be in a line, and then everything, or it wants to be in a row, and everything wants to be kind of spread out along the top of the page. So let's go ahead and open up our main.css. And we're going to need to target this lot of kind of elements here. So what I think we should do is we should put these elements into a container of some sort. So we could just do this with a div, but I reckon that a header is probably the more semantic kind of tag to use. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make a header. Here you go. Let me just zoom in as well here. A header tag to encapsulate all of our header elements. I'm just going to click and drag that in there, and then I'm going to use Option Shift and F or Alt Shift and F to format this nicely. Okay, let's save that and see what's changed. Okay, nothing really has changed. Obviously that kind of little bar has appeared because that's in our do not modify.css. You can see that we've got a border bottom here in the don't modify. That's absolutely fine. We don't need to put that, and we'll kind of ignore when those things happen coming up. Just know that the don't modify CSS is just adding some of those nicer basic styles. Okay, so in this header, if we look at our reference image here, everything needs to be kind of spread out. So what we can do here is in our CSS, we can target our header, and then we can add display flex semicolon. Okay, so let's go and have a look at our output now. Okay, so not an awful lot has changed, to be fair, but this kind of used to be down at the bottom here, but now is kind of hit up to the top. That means that some defaults must be being applied, some kind of CSS defaults. So let's now have a look at how we're going to spread all of these elements out along our top bar. Well, if we head over to our CSS tricks, and honestly, anytime that I need to use Flexbox, the first thing I do is I open this website. I'm not joking, because it just gives you a really good kind of visual reference of exactly what each Flex property does. So the one that we're actually interested in is this justify content. Now this looks to be, it looks like we need some sort of space between, or some sort of space around, or even maybe space evenly to get all of our elements spread out along that header bar. So let's have a go with that. We're going to be using justify content. So inside this header, let's say justify content, and hey, let's go with center just to see what that outputs as. Oh, fantastic. So we've got everything has kind of appeared in the center of our header. Brilliant. Let's now try end or flex end. Save this. You see, fantastic. We've got everything that's kind of shifted over to the end of our Flexbox. We could, of course, as well do start or flex start. And the opposite would be true. It's kind of all gone to the beginning. And if you remember, this is what, when we didn't have a justified content property, this was actually the default that we had. So if I just comment this out, justify content start, you'll see that nothing changes. That means that kind of the justify content start is being applied even if we don't specify a justify content. Okay, so the thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to have this kind of Airbnb logo over towards the left, and we wanted the login kind of image over towards the right, and we wanted this to all be in the center. So I think probably the most kind of likely one that we would need would be maybe space between, because we have our first element here is right at the start of our flex, and the last element would be right at the end of our flex, and we have space between all of those elements. So let's have a look at that. I'm just going to uncomment this, and then we will say space between. Okay, let's save that. Hey, this is getting somewhere now. We've got that logo towards the left. We've got our login on the right. These all seem to be a bit kind of spaced out. This isn't what we expected. Now, the reason for that is that when we look in our HTML, we're just making our header display flex. So it will see every single one of these elements as an individual flex item. So a way that we can kind of combat that or get around that would be to wrap all of these elements in their own div. Because then let's have a look what happens. So I'm going to make a div here and just pop all of these A tags inside and save this. Now you'll see that it bunches everything up here back into the middle, but that's because our Flexbox now only sees 3 separate flex items. So you see, we've been able to say, hey, Flexbox, just deal with this as one item, deal with this as another item, and then deal with this as another item. So this is one of the reasons that you'll often see on websites, you'll see very nested elements. You'll see a div inside a div inside a div, in which case you might then have a section and then more divs nested inside it. And it's so that when we style things with Flex, you're treating just this as its own item. Well, that's great. We've kind of got that looking approximately how we would expect from the reference image. The only thing is this middle bit is kind of aligned in the center of our header. So how can we do that? So let's come back over to our csstricks.com and have a look at aligning items. So I think we're a little bit further down here. Okay, so we want to align our items. Do we want them all to be near the top at the flex start? Probably not. Down at the bottom near flex end? At the center? I think that's the most likely. Or we can actually stretch them to try and make things fill the space available. So let's have a go with some of these flex start, flex end, and centers. So the first thing that I am going to do though, is I'm just going to make our header a little bit bigger, just so that we can see all of this kind of happening. So let's give our header a height of 90 pixels. And what that will mean is we've got a bit more space to see things happening. And actually, if we look back at the reference image anyway, you'll see that the header has got a bit of space, you know, kind of for all of these items to be in. It's got some kind of space above and below. Anyway. Okay, so let's try and get all of this sort of lined up. So let's head to our CSS. And what we want to do is let's have a little bit of a play with this. So our align items property if you can spell it correctly, unlike me, our align items property. Well, let's have a look at end, for example. So let's save this. We can see already that everything's kind of moved down to the flex end, to the bottom of our Flexbox container. Fab. That's not what we want, but that might be handy for you. We could say start. Yep, and everything's kind of moved up to the top of our Flexbox. But we want everything to be along that main axis, that center axis. So we'll say align items, center. Let's save that. Fantastic, and you can see that we've now got this kind of, everything's now on this center line in our header. Excellent. So if we have a look at our reference image, you'll see that these kind of the stays, the experiences and the online experiences, they are spaced out a little bit. Now, one way that you could do that is to add some padding or a margin to each of these kind of P elements. But I think probably an easier way to do that is to give the whole kind of thing, our whole sort of div, a width, and then make that itself a flexbox. So what I'm going to do here, we'll say we want to get any div that's in our header, or actually something more semantic might actually be to call this our nav. So let's just replace that nav, and don't forget to get your closing div to be a nav as well, and save this. Now in our main.css, let's go and target our nav bars, and let's just give this a width of, say, 300 pixels. A width of 300 px. And again, you should probably type it correctly. So just because we're developing this, it's really good practice to make things visible and easy for you to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say border 1 pix solid, and then any color, but I'm going to say black here. Now I will remove this before the end, but what it means is we can see what's actually happening on our page in front of us. So let's have a look at this. Brilliant. We've got a 300 pixel box that this nav is now in. So let's go ahead and use display flex on our navbar. Okay, nothing's really changed, but it's kind of everything's bunched up a little bit more. So now let's go ahead and justify our content so that it spreads out a little bit. So I would say justify content should probably be maybe space around. Let's have a look what that looks like. Okay, so what space around has done is it's taken the amount of space that will be required between these elements, and it's kind of put half as much on each side on the outside. So let's say this gap is 100 pixels. This will be 50 pixels. Of course, they're not accurate. That's just, made up numbers. But these spaces will be half as much as these spaces. If we use that space between instead of space around, you'll see that it puts an equal amount of space between all of the elements, but butts the first and the last one up to the ends. So it's entirely up to you which one you use, as long as it kind of gets you the result that you require. Okay, I'm going to keep that like that, and I'm just going to remove my border from the navbar. Brilliant, that is looking about right. Okay, let's now go ahead and move on to these cards. So in our HTML, we do actually have divs with a class of card in here already. So what we can do is we can kind of target these cards, or maybe we could put them in a Flex container. Because at the moment, these cards just exist on our page. There is no container for them to kind of be a Flexbox. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put these in our main content. So you could put these in a div or a section, but I think main is probably semantically the most correct. I'm just going to go and highlight all of these cards and then click and drag them into our main. I'm just going to do Option Shift and F or Alt Shift and F to format everything nicely. So if I save this now, you'll see that nothing's really changed on the website, but that's okay. We've not actually applied any CSS to them. Okay, so let's go to our main.css and let's grab that main element. So main, and let's set it to display flex. And let's see what happens. So if we save that now, fantastic. So everything's kind of gone into a row. So this must say that, this is basically the default behavior for Flexbox. Everything will end up in a row. If I do this now, you'll see that our pictures are kind of responsive and they get smaller. But wouldn't it be good if we could have everything kind of wrap down onto the next line? If it, instead of everything just getting smaller and smaller, wouldn't it be great if everything kind of wrapped properly? A bit like, a table of images, or if you go to the Amazon website, for example, all of the products, if you're on a wide screen, you will have, say, 6 products in rows. But if you're on a smaller screen, you might have 3 or just 2. So let's go ahead and use Flexbox to wrap all of these down for us. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to say flex-wrap is wrap. So let's save this now. Hey, wonderful. So when we've got a big screen, we can see that everything ends up in that row. But as we go down smaller and smaller, we can see that everything kind of wraps down nicely, even to the point where it goes into a column. Oh, brilliant. So what's this telling us? This says that Flexbox is a really good way of making responsive websites, especially if you've got kind of multiple cards or products or images that you want to be able to work on different screen sizes. Fab. So one of the things that we did see in our reference image is that, well, it's 2 things really. All of our cards have a gap in between them, and they're also kind of justified in the center. At the moment, everything's over here towards the left, but everything should be in the center of our webpage. So inside our main in our CSS, what we can say is, just to get everything into the center, is, well, we can use that justify content property. So we can say justify content into the center. If I save for that now, great. We now actually get everything centrally aligned. Fantastic. Now let's have a look at that gap that we need to get between our cards. Now, one way to do this might be to say in our dot card, we want to give it, say, a margin of, 15 pixels. So if we save that, we now do actually get a gap of, say, 30 pixels between each one, because each card has got 15 pixels of margin either side of it. There is a more kind of Flexbox way of doing this, though. What we can do is, instead of targeting our flex items, our card, I'm just going to comment this out because we will come back to it in a moment. is we can actually say gap. We can say give our flex items a gap of so many pixels. So let's say I want to give everything a gap of 10 pixels. Brilliant. We now end up with that 10 pixel gap between each of our flex items. Let's just demonstrate this. I'm going to uncomment this card, and we'll just give this a background color of blue. Just something really bright blue so that we can see what's happening. And you'll see that it's actually given that gap, not just on the kind of the sides of our items, but also on the top as well. So this is a way that you can kind of make sure that you're keeping a consistent gap between all of your items. Excellent. So I'm just going to comment this out again because we don't actually need to have our cards blue. So that looks pretty close to our reference. I think that's almost completely done. There is just one thing that we need to take care of, and that's this star rating here. So if we look in the reference image, these cards, the star rating is to the right-hand side of the location. But for us, this is just following the regular document flow, and these are not being displayed side by side. So we can use our knowledge of Flexboxes to say, well, we can put these into their own Flexbox div. So let's just have a look at this for now. Obviously nothing will happen because our divs are, have no CSS applied to them. But if we head over to our main.css, now we could give that a class if we wanted, but we can use our knowledge of CSS selectors to say that our .card, well, any divs inside them, we can just target those. So let's say .card space div. Well, this should be display flex. Let's save that and see what happens. Oh, brilliant. So we've now got these in a row. Wonderful. So let's now space these out. I think these probably need to be right on the right-hand side and completely on the left-hand side as well. So here we'll say justify content, space around, and save that. Ooh, that didn't quite work, did it? Why is that? It's because we've got space all the way around all of the elements in that Flexbox. So what we need to do is we need to say space between. We'll save that. Hey, brilliant. That looks more like it. Now, let's just see what happens when we wrap all of these kind of header, kind of the top part of our cards in divs. So here we have a div that has 2 flex elements, but here we're only going to end up having 1. So let's call this div and we'll put Dorset UK inside it and save that. Now you'll see it doesn't matter because the space around, if there's only 1 element, will just keep everything towards the flex start anyway. That's the default property. That's the default way that this will work. Great, so let's go ahead and just apply that kind of that thinking, putting these kind of titles of the cards into divs so that we can get everything as it was per the reference. So make a div there and put this inside it, and then we'll also do the same with the Isle of Wight one here. And save that. Wonderful. So yeah, our website seems to be working exactly as we'd expect. So some of the things that I want you to take away from this is that you need to set your container of elements to display Flex in order to be able to use all of those kind of Flex properties available to us. We can use justify content to space out our elements along the axis of our Flexbox. And we can also nest Flexboxes inside Flexboxes. So like we saw here with this nav bar at the top, whilst it's in the header, which is a Flexbox, it itself is also a Flexbox. We can also wrap all of our Flex items like this. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on every single Flex element. What I would encourage you to do is to test out all of the properties that are available to us. Go through that CSS Tricks website and try out all of the different properties. Something that I do want to just highlight to you though, is that Flex doesn't just work in rows, it can also work in columns. So let's say we want, at some point, we just want to make all of these appear one on top of the other instead of in a row. So what we can do is, if we go back to our main CSS, inside our main, we can use a property called Flex Direction. So if we set this to column, and we save this now, you'll see that this is now all in a column. Now that might be handy coming up with some of the exercises that I have for you. We can also reverse this Flex Direction as well. So we could actually say that we want to column reverse. Now before I save this, let's just see, we've got the St. Margaret's Bay one at the top and we have the Isle of Wight at the bottom. So what happens when I save this now? Cool, well we get it all in reverse order. So this might be handy if you want to show certain products in a kind of an ascending order or a descending order. You might just decide to, if you have everything sorted by price and then people want things sorted the opposite way, you could just change the Flex Direction, for example.